Trust God fully and watch everything change. Powerful Christian motivation to strengthen your faith. My dear friend, I want you to receive something right now that I believe has been divinely arranged for this specific moment in your life. Not for a general audience, not for the masses of people who might happen across these words. For you, specifically, personally, intimately. The God who spoke galaxies into existence with a single word. The God who formed you in your mother's womb with deliberate and loving intention. The God who has been present through every single moment of your life from your first breath to this very second. That God has been watching you. He knows exactly where you are right now. He knows exactly what you have been carrying. He knows the specific weight of the specific burden that has been pressing on your specific life through this specific season. And He has something to say to you today that is going to reach into the deepest part of that burden and begin to lift it in a way that nothing else has been able to lift it. What He wants to say is this: trust me fully, not partially, not with the portion of your heart that has not yet been wounded by disappointment, not with the areas of your life that feel safe enough to surrender while keeping the areas that feel most fragile tightly in your own grip. Fully, completely, without reservation. Without the protective holding back that long seasons of difficulty tend to produce in the human heart. Trust me with everything. With the things that are going well and the things that are not. With the prayers that have been answered and the ones that have not. With the dreams that are alive and the ones that appear to have died. With the relationships that are thriving and the ones that are broken. With the financial situations that are stable and the ones that are precarious. With the health that feels strong and the health that feels threatened, with all of it, every single dimension and detail and corner of your life, trust me with all of it, fully. And when you do, when you make that choice, not once dramatically, but daily, deliberately, continually, something is going to happen that you have perhaps stopped allowing yourself to fully believe is possible. Everything is going to change, not some things, not the things that seem most ready to change while the others remain stubbornly fixed. Everything, because full trust in the living God does not produce partial transformation. It produces comprehensive, all-encompassing, every dimension of your life transformation that begins in your spirit and works its way outward into every circumstance and every relationship and every situation that your life touches. That is the promise embedded in what I am sharing with you today. Trust God fully and watch everything change. Not might change under the right conditions. Not could change if you believe hard enough and perform well enough and pray often enough. Will change, because when a human soul opens itself completely to the sovereign activity of the living God moves comprehensively, powerfully, in ways that exceed every expectation and confound every doubt and leave no room for any explanation but the faithfulness of the God who was trusted. So receive this word, receive it fully, let it reach every guarded corner of your heart, let it speak into every area where you have been holding back from full surrender, let it ignite in you the kind of comprehensive, reckless, world-shaking trust that moves mountains and parts seas and raises the dead and transforms everything it touches, because that kind of trust is available to you right now, and the God who is inviting you into it is the same God who has never once failed anyone who accepted the invitation. Trust Him fully and watch everything change. Let me begin by being completely honest about what full trust actually requires, because I have found that one of the greatest barriers to experiencing the transformation that comes from trusting God fully is a misunderstanding of what full trust actually means in practical terms. Many people hear the call to full trust and interpret it as a call to emotional certainty, to have no doubts, to feel completely confident at all times, to never experience fear or uncertainty or the kind of anxious questioning that arises when circumstances are genuinely difficult and the outcome is genuinely unclear. And because they interpret full trust as requiring that emotional certainty, they conclude that they do not have it. They look at the doubts that still visit them and the fears that still arise and the uncertainty that still lingers, and they say, I cannot fully trust God because I still feel afraid. I still have questions. I still experience moments of genuine doubt. And full trust, I assume, means having none of those things. But that interpretation is wrong, and it is important that we correct it at the very beginning of this conversation. conversation because as long as you believe that full trust requires the absence of doubt and fear and uncertainty, you will never experience the transformation that full trust produces. Because doubt and fear and uncertainty are not the opposites of trust. They are the context in which trust becomes meaningful. They are the very soil in which genuine, costly, world-changing trust grows. The disciples were in a boat in the middle of a storm when Jesus asked Peter to come to him on the water. Peter's trust was not demonstrated in the absence of fear. The wind was still howling, the waves were still crashing, the natural world was still providing every reason to be terrified. Peter's trust was demonstrated in the choice he made in the middle of the fear. He got out of the boat, he stepped onto the water, he moved toward Jesus in the middle of the storm, with the storm still raging all around him. That was trust, not the absence of fear, but the decision to move toward God in the middle of it. And when Peter took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the waves, when the fear became greater than the focus, he began to sink. Not because the storm got worse, the storm was the same, but because his focus shifted from the one who was the reason for the trust to the circumstances that were the reason for the fear. And Jesus reached out and caught him and said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Full trust is not the elimination of the storm. It is the decision to keep your eyes on Jesus in the middle of it. It is the choice to move toward him rather than away from him when the waves are at their highest and the wind is at its loudest. It is the daily, moment-by-moment decision to fix your gaze on the one who is worthy of your trust rather than on the circumstances that are providing reasons for your fear. And that decision, maintained consistently through the storm, is what produces the transformation that changes everything. So if you have been waiting to fully trust God until the doubts are gone and the fears have subsided and the uncertainty has resolved, I want to release you from that waiting. The doubts may still be present. The fears may still arise. The uncertainty may still linger. Trust him anyway. In the middle of all of it, keep your eyes on him in the middle of the storm. Step out of the boat toward him even while the waves are still crashing, because it is the stepping out that is the trust, and it is the trust that changes everything. I want to speak now about what I believe is the single most significant shift that happens in a person's life when they move from partial trust to full trust in God. It is a shift that is both internal and external, both spiritual and practical, both immediate in some dimensions and progressive in others. But it is comprehensive in its direction. It touches everything. And when it begins, when the shift from partial to full trust begins to take hold in a human life, the transformation that follows is unmistakable. The shift is this: you stop trying to be the author of your own story and you begin to trust the author who has been writing it all along. You stop spending the enormous energy that partial trust requires, the energy of holding your own life together, of managing the outcomes, of strategizing your way through every challenge, of trying to ensure by your own effort and wisdom and networking and maneuvering that the right things happen and the wrong things are prevented. And you begin to release that energy back to the God who never needed your help to fulfill his plan and who has been working around your attempts at control to advance his purposes in your life even when you did not realize it. This shift does not mean passivity. It does not mean that you stop working or stop planning or stop making wise decisions or stop being responsible for the things that God has entrusted to your stewardship. It means that you hold all of those things differently. You work with open hands rather than clenched fists. You plan with submitted purposes rather than self-determined outcomes. You make decisions with the acknowledgement that God's wisdom surpasses yours, and his perspective is higher than yours, and his knowledge of what is good for you exceeds your own self-knowledge by an infinite measure. And you release the outcomes to him rather than trying to engineer them yourself. And what happens when you make that shift? When you move from being the anxious author of your own story to being the trusting participant in a story that God is authoring is remarkable. The anxiety diminishes, not because the circumstances have changed, but because the weight of trying to control them has been lifted. You were never designed to carry that weight. The human soul was not built to sustain the chronic anxiety of being responsible for outcomes that are too large and too complex and too multidimensional for any human being to truly manage. And when you release that weight to the God who was always meant to carry it, the relief is profound and immediate and physically perceptible. The peace that Paul described as passing all understanding begins to settle into the spaces where anxiety used to live, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer trying to resolve it yourself. You have placed it in the hands of the one who is fully capable of resolving it in ways that are better than anything you could have engineered. And resting in that placement produces the peace that your own best efforts at managing your life never could. That is the first change, the change of peace, and it is the foundation on which every other change is built. The second change that comes from trusting God fully is the change of perspective. When you trust God fully, when you genuinely release your grip on the outcomes and begin to rest in the confidence that He is sovereign over every detail of your life, your perspective on everything shifts. The things that once looked like obstacles begin to look like opportunities. The things that once looked like endings begin to look like redirections. The things that once looked like the plan falling apart begin to look like the plan falling into place in ways you did not expect. This is not a change in the circumstances themselves. The circumstances may look exactly the same before and after the shift to full trust. The closed door is still closed. The unanswered prayer is still unanswered. The difficult situation is still difficult. But the lens through which you are seeing those circumstances has been changed, and a change in the lens changes everything about what you see through it. Before full trust, the lens is primarily the lens of your own understanding. You are evaluating your circumstances according to what makes sense to you, according to what aligns with your plans and your expectations, and your sense of what a good outcome would look like. And when circumstances deviate from those plans and expectations, they register as problems, as evidence that something has gone wrong, as threats to the future you were building. After full trust, the lens begins to shift toward the perspective of God. Not completely, because our natural minds will always have limitations that prevent us from seeing with full divine clarity, but increasingly, as you practice full trust, as you habitually choose to release your circumstances to God rather than trying to manage them yourself, your perspective begins to include possibilities that your own understanding would have missed. You begin to see the closed door as protection from something that would have harmed you. You begin to see the unanswered prayer as wisdom from a God who knows something you do not know about what you were asking for. You begin to see the difficult situation as the preparation that the next chapter of your story requires. And that shift in perspective changes everything about how you navigate your daily life. You move through challenges with a steadiness that was not previously available to you. You respond to setbacks with a resilience that surprises even you. You encounter disappointments without being derailed by them because you have learned to hold them within a framework of trust that can absorb them without collapsing. You become, in the most profound and practical sense, unshakable. Not because nothing ever goes wrong, but because your response to things going wrong has been fundamentally reoriented by the shift to full trust. That is the second change, the change of perspective. And it is as transformative in its effects as any external change of circumstance that God could bring about, because how you see your life shapes your life as powerfully as what is actually in it. I want to take you now to one of the most powerful demonstrations of what full trust in God produces in the life of a person who chooses it in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. I want to take you to the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three young men who were faced with a choice between their loyalty to God and their own physical survival, and who made a declaration of trust so complete and so unconditional and so breathtaking in its absolute surrender that I believe it stands as one of the most powerful models of full trust in all of Scripture. King Nebuchadnezzar had constructed a golden image and commanded all people to bow down and worship it at the sound of the music. The penalty for refusal was immediate execution in a furnace heated to such an extreme temperature that it was fatal to the soldiers who threw the condemned into it. This was not a mild inconvenience. This was a literally life or death moment. The cost of choosing trust over compliance was not social awkwardness or professional difficulty or the disapproval of powerful people. It was death by fire, immediate and certain. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow. And when they were brought before the king and given a final opportunity to comply, they said something that I want you to receive as one of the most extraordinary declarations of full trust ever spoken by human lips. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up, even if he does not. Those 4 words are the summit of full trust. They are the declaration that trust in God is not conditional on a specific outcome, not conditional on deliverance, not conditional on the miracle arriving in the form and at the time that the human heart desires. The trust is complete regardless of the outcome. Even if God does not deliver us in the way we are hoping, we will still trust him. We will still choose him. We will still refuse to bow to anything or anyone else, because our trust is not in the specific outcome. Our trust is in the God who is worthy of trust, regardless of the outcome. That is full trust. And I want you to notice what happened when it was demonstrated. The furnace was heated 7 times hotter than normal. The men who threw the 3 into the furnace were killed by the heat, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown in bound. And then Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace and saw something that made him jump to his feet in astonishment. He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." In the moment of their full trust, in the moment of their absolute surrender to the will and the wisdom and the sovereignty of God, regardless of the outcome, God showed up. Not before the furnace, in it, not removing them from the trial, accompanying them through it. And the testimony that was produced, the conversion of Nebuchadnezzar's heart from persecution to proclamation, the decree he issued that no one could say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, was a direct result of the full trust that these 3 men demonstrated when everything in them had reason to trust only in their own survival instincts. Full trust produces the presence of God in the fire. Full trust produces the testimony that no human strategy could have engineered. Full trust produces the transformation not just of your own situation, but of the hearts of everyone who witnesses what God does in response to it. Choose full trust, even in the furnace, especially in the furnace, because it is in the furnace that the full presence and power of God is most clearly revealed. Now, I want to speak about the areas of your life where the call to full trust is most specific and most urgent. Because full trust is not an abstract spiritual concept that operates somewhere above the details of daily life. It is the most practical, most applicable, most immediately relevant spiritual choice you can make in the middle of the specific, concrete, real-world situations that you are navigating right now. The first area where full trust changes everything is your financial life. Money is one of the most powerful areas of human anxiety, and it is one of the areas where partial trust is most common. Many believers trust God with their spiritual life, with their relationship with Him, with their eternal destiny. But when it comes to the finances, when it comes to the mortgage and the debt and the insufficient income and the unexpected expenses, there is a tendency to shift from trust to management, to take the financial dimension of life out of God's hands and put it into your own, to make decisions based entirely on the visible numbers rather than on the invisible resources of the God who owns everything. Full trust in the financial dimension does not mean financial irresponsibility. It does not mean ignoring the numbers or making reckless decisions and calling it faith. It means doing what is wise and responsible with what you have while simultaneously holding the outcomes in open hands before the God who is your provider. It means tithing when the budget says you cannot afford to, because you trust the God who said to test Him in this and see if He will not open the floodgates of heaven. It means giving generously when the account is low, because you trust the God who said that the measure you use will be measured back to you. It means praying specifically over your financial needs rather than only worrying about them, because you trust the God who said He will supply all your needs according to His riches in glory. And when you bring full trust to your financial life, the transformation that follows is not always immediately dramatic. Sometimes it is. Provision arrives from unexpected sources at precisely the right moment. Resources appear through channels that could not have been predicted by any human planning. The numbers that did not add up somehow work out in ways that no accountant can explain. But even when the transformation is gradual, even when it operates through faithful stewardship and wise decision-making over time, the trajectory changes, the direction changes. The anxiety that used to dominate your relationship with money begins to diminish as the trust that God is your provider begins to take deeper root. And the life that was defined by financial fear begins to be redefined by financial faith. Full trust in your financial life changes everything. Not always immediately, but thoroughly and permanently. The second area where full trust changes everything is your relational life. Relationships are perhaps the area of human experience where the temptation to control is strongest and the cost of that control is highest. Because the people we love are not variables we can manage. They are free agents with their own wills and their own wounds and their own ways of seeing and responding to the world. Then the more we love them, the more desperately we want to ensure the right outcomes for them and for us. And the more desperately we try to ensure those outcomes by our own control and management, the more damage we do to the very relationships we are trying to protect. Full trust in God changes your relational life by changing your relational posture. It releases you from the exhausting and ultimately impossible task of trying to control how the people you love feel and think and behave. It frees you from the chronic anxiety of trying to manage other people's responses to you. It liberates you from the grip of other people's opinions and other people's approval and other people's validation as the primary source of your sense of worth and security. Because when you fully trust God, your security is no longer located in the responses of the people around you. It is located in the unchanging love and acceptance of the God who knows you completely and loves you fully regardless of any human opinion about you. And when your security is located there, in God rather than in people, your relationships are transformed. You love more freely because you are not loving from a place of need. You give more generously because you are not giving to get something in return. You forgive more readily because you are not holding on to offenses as leverage for your own protection. You are more present and more genuine and more capable of real connection because you are not performing for approval or hiding for self-protection. You can be fully yourself in your relationships because your sense of self is grounded in the one who designed it, not in the fluctuating reactions of the people around you. Full trust in God changes your relationships, not by changing everyone around you immediately, but by changing you, by making you the kind of person who can love freely and genuinely and sacrificially in ways that tend over time to call forth the best in the people around you. And that change in you produces changes in your relationships that you could not have engineered through any amount of relational strategy or management. The third area where full trust changes everything is your sense of purpose and calling, because one of the most paralyzing forces in the life of a person who has not yet fully learned to trust God is the fear of making the wrong choices about their life's direction, the fear of missing the calling, the fear of stepping out in faith and being wrong, the fear of investing years in a direction that turns out not to be the right one. And that fear causes many people to remain in a state of paralyzed indecision for years or even decades, waiting for a certainty they never receive before they take a step they are afraid to take. Full trust in God liberates you from that paralysis, not by giving you absolute certainty before you step, but by giving you the confidence that if you genuinely trust God and genuinely seek His will and genuinely step out in the direction that seems most aligned with what He has placed in your heart, He is faithful enough to course correct you if you step in the wrong direction. He is sovereign enough to take a step that was not perfectly calibrated and use it as part of the path that leads to where He always intended you to go. And He is gracious enough to not abandon you in the middle of a step that was taken in genuine faith and genuine trust, even if the step itself turned out to be less than perfectly directed. The God who is sovereign over all things can work with imperfect steps taken in genuine trust. What He cannot work through easily is the paralysis of fear that refuses to step at all, because the path is not fully revealed before you walk it. It is revealed as you walk it. And full trust is what gives you the courage to put your foot down on the path that is currently only partially visible and to trust that the next step will be revealed as you take the current one. Step into your calling with full trust, not perfect certainty, full trust. And watch the God who placed the calling in you begin to unfold the path beneath your feet with every step you take in His direction. I want to speak now about something that most messages on the topic of trusting God do not adequately address. I want to speak about what full trust looks like in the middle of grief. Because there is a particular kind of pain that has nothing to do with doubt or disobedience or insufficient faith. It is the pain of genuine loss. of having someone or something that was genuinely precious, genuinely taken from your life. And in the middle of that pain, in the middle of the raw, unmanageable, overwhelming experience of grief, the call to trust God can feel not just difficult, but almost offensive, like being told to smile in the middle of a funeral, like being asked to feel what you genuinely cannot feel in the moment of your most genuine pain. I want to speak to grief with tenderness and with absolute honesty. Full trust in God does not require the elimination of grief. Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, not because he lacked faith, not because he did not know that he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead. He wept because he was fully present to the pain of the people he loved, because grief is the appropriate response to genuine loss, because love expressed through tears is not a failure of faith. It is the evidence of a heart that has loved fully and is feeling fully the cost of that love. But even in grief, even in the raw and overwhelming experience of loss, full trust in God is not only possible, but is the thing that carries you through it. Because full trust in grief is not the denial of the pain. It is the choice to bring the pain to God rather than carrying it alone. It is the decision to pour out your grief before the God who is described in the Psalms as near to the brokenhearted, the God who saves those who are crushed in spirit, the God who collects your tears in a bottle and records them in his book, the God who does not dismiss your grief as weakness, but receives it as the honest offering of a heart that is genuinely suffering and genuinely in need of a comfort that no human source can adequately provide. Full trust in grief does not mean trusting that the loss was good or that the pain serves a purpose you can currently articulate. It means trusting the God who is present in the grief with you, who is not watching from a comfortable distance as you suffer, but who is in it with you, who is carrying what you cannot carry, who is sustaining what you cannot sustain on your own, who is the only adequate source of the comfort that this kind of pain requires. And over time, as you bring your grief to God rather than bearing it alone, something begins to happen that no human grief management strategy can produce. The grief does not go away immediately, but it is gradually transformed, not into pretended happiness or forced positivity, but into something that carries within it the seed of genuine hope. The deep, patient, hard-won hope of a person who has been through real loss and found that the God they trusted was present through all of it and faithful through all of it and is still working in all of it toward a purpose that the grief cannot yet reveal, but that trust is willing to wait for. Full trust in the middle of grief changes everything, not by removing the pain, by accompanying you through it with a presence and a power that no other source can provide. Let me speak now about the Daniel principle of full trust, because I believe the story of Daniel in the lion's den contains one of the most powerful and practically applicable lessons about what happens when a person chooses full trust in God over the very real threat of severe consequences. Daniel was a man of extraordinary faithfulness. He had maintained his trust in God through decades of serving in the courts of foreign kings without compromising his integrity or his devotion. And when his enemies constructed a legal trap designed specifically to force him to choose between his faithfulness to God and his physical survival, Daniel made a choice that demonstrated what full trust looks like in the face of the most extreme pressure. He went home and opened his window toward Jerusalem and prayed 3 times a day exactly as he had always done. He did not hide his trust. He did not modify his practice to accommodate the threat. He did not find a middle ground that would allow him to maintain his relationship with God privately while outwardly complying with the decree that was designed to trap him. He trusted God fully, publicly, visibly, at the direct and immediate cost of his personal safety, and he was thrown into the lion's den. The stone was placed over the mouth of the den, and the king, who actually liked Daniel and was distressed at being manipulated into this situation, spent a sleepless night hoping that somehow Daniel's God would rescue him. And in the morning, when the stone was removed and the king called out to Daniel, Daniel answered from the lion's den with a composure and a peace that is itself one of the most remarkable testimonies to the power of full trust in all of Scripture. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Not a scratch on him, not a wound, not even the smell of death. The lions that had been fed by the blood of other victims were completely powerless before the protection of the God who Daniel had fully trusted, and the testimony that was produced by Daniel's full trust reached further than his own deliverance. King Darius issued a decree throughout his entire kingdom that people were to fear and reverence the God of Daniel. because he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. One man's full trust in God produced a royal proclamation throughout an entire kingdom. One man's choice to trust God in the face of certain death produced a testimony that reached every corner of the most powerful empire in the world. One man's refusal to compromise his trust for the sake of his own safety produced the kind of transformation that changed everything, not just in his own life, but in the lives of everyone whose world intersected with his. That is what full trust in God is capable of producing, not just in the ancient world, in your life, in your situation. The full trust that you choose in your lion's den, in your furnace, in your impossible situation, is capable of producing a testimony and a transformation that reaches far beyond the visible boundaries of your own life. It is capable of reaching everyone whose life touches yours. And the God who shut the lions' mouths for Daniel is the same God who is present in your situation right now. Trust him fully and watch what he does. I want to speak now about the most common reason that people never move from partial trust to full trust in God. And it is not doubt. It is not insufficient faith. It is not lack of knowledge about what the scriptures say about trust. The most common reason that people never fully trust God is something much more specific and much more honest than any of those things. It is the fear of being disappointed. The fear that if they trust fully, if they release everything into God's hands without reservation, if they believe with their whole heart and expect with genuine expectation and open themselves completely to what God is about to do, and then it does not happen the way they believed it would, the disappointment will be too great to survive. That the fall from full hope to full disappointment is a fall too far. And so they stay in the safer middle ground, trusting enough to feel like a person of faith, holding back enough to protect themselves from the full force of what a full disappointment would feel like. I want to address that fear with the most honest and most loving word I can bring to it. The fear of disappointment is real. It is valid. It comes from genuine experience of genuine pain. And I am not going to dismiss it or minimize it or tell you that it should not exist. But I want to offer you a reframe that I believe has the potential to change your relationship to that fear completely. The reframe is this: you cannot disappoint-proof your life by limiting your trust, because the disappointment that comes from holding back from full trust is not smaller than the disappointment of trusting fully and seeing an unexpected outcome. It is actually larger. Because the disappointment of spending your life at partial trust, of living below the level of faith you were designed for, of experiencing only a fraction of the transformation and the peace and the purpose that full trust produces, that disappointment accumulates over a lifetime into something that is more costly than any single episode of unexpected outcome that full trust might have produced. The person who never fully trusted because they were afraid of being disappointed arrives at the end of their life having spent it managing their faith rather than living it, having protected themselves from the full cost of trust at the price of the full benefit of it. And the question that lingers in the quietest moments of that life is not, what if I had trusted and been disappointed? It is, what if I had trusted and seen what God could do with a life that was fully His? Do not let the fear of disappointment be what keeps you from the full life that full trust produces, because the God you are considering trusting fully is not a God who delights in disappointing His children. He is a God whose track record across all of human history is one of faithfulness to everyone who truly trusted Him. Not always in the specific form that was expected, not always in the specific time frame that was hoped for, but faithfully, genuinely, comprehensively. Trust Him fully. The risk of the trust is always smaller than the cost of the holding back. There is a prayer that I want to walk you through before I bring this message to its close. Not a prayer that you read passively, a prayer that you pray actively, a prayer that is itself an act of full trust. Because prayer in this context is not a performance or a formula or a religious exercise designed to meet a spiritual obligation.